Today's backdrop is school finance in Wisconsin. And when you look at this title of Wisconsin school funding in a nutshell, there isn't a nutshell. It's really complicated. And this is a slide from a recent presentation by Dr. Julie Underwood showing all the different sources of finance that Wisconsin school districts receive. The governor has been advocating we need to increase our school funding because it's the right thing to do. And our Republican leaders, some of them advocate to expand the school voucher program, which has absolutely no empirical evidence to do. So I agree with the governor, but I don't think that that's a very complete way to advocate to increase investment in education. So in a corporation, in a bank, in an insurance company, at a church, athletic department, if you wanted to advocate to increase investment in some area, then you would have to make a case. It would have to be done professionally, and you'd have to make a complete argument and support your argument. And we don't ever hear that from politicians. So that's really the backdrop for today about all of this. So I see education as an investment in human capital. So we have compulsory education in the United States, which has a very important civic purpose. It's humanistic, so it's moral, but it's also an economic, there's an economic reason to do it. We do have an equalization formula in Wisconsin people need to generally understand, although it's really hard to simplify it. I'm going to do my best. If in a presentation, somebody would provide a situational analysis, so historical trends and things going on. You need to appeal broadly in order to sell your idea, what you're trying to do, and then argue the sustainability of it with projections and make a case for the expected return. So since 1975, Wisconsin has distributed its state aid to public school districts through a tax-based three-tiered equalization formula that's really complicated, but it was designed to address property wealth differences. And then since 1993, we've had this revenue limit. This is a map showing the different, these are spending limits that were established based on prior school funding. So it's kind of odd, but the amount of total of property tax revenue to the district and the state aid can't exceed these spending limits. And they range very widely. A lot of districts are below the 12,000 that Madison has, and then some of the top outlier ones, the most are 19,000 per student. So this is really kind of odd. Most people probably don't know that this exists. This seems like something that could be an obvious thing to fix. So here's some trends that we could look at too. So over the past decade, the state enacted $8.7 billion in tax cuts, $3.5 billion in cuts to state school aids. And the top map, right map, you won't be able to read this, but we've really seen an increase in the number of students who live in poverty, extreme poverty throughout the state. Rurally, we have pockets of urban poverty, but this is a really bad trend. And we've seen declining enrollments in a lot of districts. This puts lots of pressures on districts to be able to function. And then at the same time, we've seen a decline in special education reimbursements. The federal special education bill mandates a lot of things that the school districts are required to comply with. They have to pay for them somehow, all these different things. But the federal bill doesn't fund. And so states reimburse school districts, and our reimbursement has dropped from 35% to 25% over the past 20 years. So that's a trend too. 10 years ago, Wisconsin was still a top 12 public education funded supported state in the United States. Today we're median, and there have been deleterious consequences. And so this is one of the arguments to increase the investment in public education funding. Now, how about the bipartisan support for this? Because it does seem to be a political football. Remarkably, given how stalemated Wisconsin politics have been, in 2018, a Blue Ribbon Commission on School Funding was put together, and a bipartisan commission went around the state and collected public input in a series of 8 hearings. They wrote a very comprehensive report that was presented at the beginning of 2019 by 2 moderate Republican leaders. And they went through a series of, they made a recommendation of a series of very specific things. So doing something about that map. I won't read all these points, but adjusting revenue limits for the declining enrollment, addressing the declining enrollments, increasing state school aids and doing away with the levy tax credit, which is based on home value. I don't have time. I'm not going to try to explain it here, but it should be gotten rid of. Reinstituting inflation index into the state aids, which would seem important to do now, given that we're going to be experiencing inflation and then increasing special education reimbursements to anywhere from 30 to 60%. And so when you consider all of those backdrops and you think about what would be a compelling argument to increase our investment in public education, here's a model that we're working on. It's not complete yet, but I've taken the top blue chart, takes projects 4 years. The governor's term is 4 years. Often in business, people do 5-year financial projections. We have a 2-year biannual budget in Wisconsin. So what we tend to see is things framed in 2 years. But why not 4 years? Let's project what the state fiscal outcome is going to be for the next 4 years. And then the red number, I just plugged in $1 billion in increased investment in public education, just to show that the state could commit to it and that it would be sustainable. That's a really important frame of reference, and it would be a necessary part of anybody's argument if it was a professional field. So here's at the bottom the key points that I would advocate that would make sense to consider would be equalize the revenue, fix the map, just call it $12,000 across the board, up the special education reimbursements to 50%, reinstitute inflation increases, adjust for declining enrollments. There are other categorical aids, mental health and poverty and things that would make sense to do too. But there's no empirical justification for expanding the vouchers, so we shouldn't do it. And this is an example of how advocating for increasing investment in any area in Wisconsin, this should be done with roads, broadband, healthcare, and frame this as part of a long-term economic plan. That's what we should expect from our politicians.